At my sister's wedding, I became the joke of the entire room. People were laughing, whispering, staring, and I just stood there, frozen. But everything changed the moment my 2-year-old son picked up the microphone. My name is Lily Anderson, and I'm 56 years old now. But the story I'm about to tell happened years ago, on a day that completely changed how I saw my family and my own strength. Back then, my son Ethan was only 12. He was quiet, observant, and far more aware of people than most adults I knew. And that day, he saw everything. My younger sister, Claire, had always been the center of attention in our family. Beautiful, confident, and outspoken, she had a way of drawing people toward her without even trying. Growing up, I was always the opposite. Calm, responsible, invisible. I didn't mind it when we were younger, but as adults, the difference became harder to ignore. Claire didn't just enjoy attention, she expected it. And somehow, every family event became about her. Birthdays, holidays, even moments that weren't hers. Still, I tried to maintain a good relationship with her, because at the end of the day, she was my sister. When Claire got engaged, the entire family celebrated. Her fiancé, Mark, seemed charming at first. Confident, outgoing, funny. The kind of man who could walk into a room and immediately take control of it. But something about him always felt slightly uncomfortable. He had a sharp sense of humor, the kind that sometimes crossed the line. During one of our first family dinners with him, he made a joke about my cooking. It wasn't cruel enough to call out directly, but it wasn't kind either. Everyone laughed, including Claire. I smiled politely, because that's what I had always done. Ignored the small things, let them pass. But over time, those small things started adding up. Little comments, subtle digs, always delivered with a smile, and always followed by laughter. I began to notice something else too. Mark didn't just joke randomly. He targeted people, and for some reason, I became one of his favorite targets. Claire never stopped him. If anything, she encouraged it. "Oh, relax," she would say whenever I looked uncomfortable. "He's just joking." That phrase again, just joking, as if humor automatically erased the impact of words. When Claire asked me to attend the wedding, I said yes immediately. Of course I would. Despite everything, I still wanted to support her. Ethan was excited too. "Will there be cake?" he asked. I laughed. "Definitely." "Then I'm coming." The wedding was held at a large hotel ballroom. Elegant decorations, soft golden lights, dozens of round tables filled with guests. Everything looked perfect. Claire looked stunning in her white dress. Mark looked confident, standing beside her like he owned the room. The ceremony itself went smoothly. They exchanged vows, smiled at each other. Everyone clapped as they were pronounced husband and wife. For a moment, it felt like a normal, happy wedding. But the reception was where everything changed. After dinner, the speeches began. The best man spoke first, then one of Claire's bridesmaids. People laughed, clapped. Everything felt light and celebratory. Then Mark stood up. "I'd like to say a few words too," he announced, picking up the microphone. The room quieted. He smiled confidently, scanning the crowd. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began. His tone was warm, charming, exactly what people expected. Then his eyes landed on me, and something shifted. "Especially family," he continued, "because they really show you what you're marrying into." A few people chuckled lightly. I felt a small knot form in my stomach. I had seen that look before. Mark walked slowly across the room, still holding the microphone. "And sometimes," he added casually, "you meet people who remind you exactly what you don't want in life." The laughter grew louder. I froze. Because now, everyone was looking around, trying to understand who he was talking about. Mark stopped walking, right in front of my table, right in front of me. "And sometimes," he said with a smirk, Those people are already sitting right here. The room went quiet for a split second. Then someone laughed, then another, and suddenly, the entire table was looking at me. My face grew hot. My hands tightened around the edge of the table. Claire laughed softly from across the room. Not surprised. Not uncomfortable. Just amused. Mark leaned slightly toward me. I mean, let's be honest, he said into the microphone. We all have that one family member who just doesn't quite fit, right? More laughter. Louder this time. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. All I could hear was the sound of people laughing around me. And then I felt a small hand touch mine. Ethan! He looked up at me with a calm, serious expression. Not confused. Not embarrassed. Just aware. He had seen everything. He had heard every word. And then, slowly, he stood up from his chair. Before I could say anything, before anyone even noticed, my 2-year-old son started walking toward the stage, toward the microphone. And in that moment, I had no idea that what he was about to say would silence the entire room. For a moment, I didn't even realize what Ethan was doing. I just felt his hand slip away from mine, and then I saw him walking straight toward the stage, toward the microphone. My heart jumped. Ethan, I whispered, but my voice didn't come out loud enough. Around us, people were still laughing. Mark was smiling confidently, enjoying the moment he had created. He hadn't even noticed my son yet. Most of the guests hadn't, because who pays attention to a 12-year-old at a wedding? But Ethan wasn't hesitating. He walked calmly, step by step, past the tables, past the guests, straight toward the front. And something about the way he moved made me freeze. He wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. He was focused. When he reached the stage, he stood quietly for a second. The DJ noticed him first. Hey, buddy, the man said softly. Do you need something? Ethan nodded politely. Can I say something? The DJ hesitated. He glanced toward the bride and groom. Mark shrugged casually, still amused. Sure, he said into the mic. Let's hear from the next generation. A few guests laughed again. They thought it was part of the entertainment. A cute little moment. They had no idea. The DJ lowered the microphone to Ethan's height, and for a second, the room grew quieter. Not silent yet, but quieter. Ethan took a small breath. Then he spoke. My name is Ethan. His voice was clear, not loud, but steady. I'm Lily's son. A few people nodded politely. Some smiled, still expecting something sweet or harmless. Ethan continued. I don't usually talk in front of people. A soft chuckle moved through the room. But I think I should say something today. Now more people were paying attention. Because there was something different about his tone. Something serious. Ethan looked directly at Mark, then at Claire, then back at the guests. My mom didn't say anything, he continued, but I saw what happened. The room grew quieter, completely quiet this time. No laughter, no whispers, just attention. Ethan held the microphone with both hands. Everyone laughed, he said. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Maybe you thought it was funny, he added. But it didn't feel funny. His words landed softly, but heavily. Mark's smile faded slightly. Ethan went on. My mom is the kindest person I know. I felt my chest tighten. And she never makes fun of people, he continued, even when they deserve it. Now the silence was absolute. Not a single person moved. Ethan's eyes moved slowly across the room. So I don't understand why people laugh when someone is being mean. A woman at a nearby table looked down at her hands. Someone else cleared their throat quietly. Ethan looked back at Mark. And then he said something that changed everything. If you need to make someone feel small to be funny, then maybe you're not actually funny. The words hung in the air. Simple, direct, impossible to ignore. Mark blinked. For the first time that night, he didn't have a response. No joke. No smile. Nothing. Ethan turned slightly toward Claire. And if you laugh when someone hurts your family, he paused, then finished quietly. That's not love. A soft gasp moved through the room. Claire's expression froze. Her smile disappeared completely. Ethan lowered the microphone slightly. I'm only 12, he said, but I know my mom deserves respect. He looked at me for a moment, and in his eyes, I saw something that made my throat tighten. Pride. Then he handed the microphone back to the DJ. Thank you, he said politely. And just like that, he stepped off the stage. No drama, no hesitation. He simply walked back toward our table. The room stayed completely silent as he walked. Dozens of guests watching him, processing what they had just heard. When he reached me, I stood up immediately. I wrapped my arms around him tightly. He hugged me back without saying a word. And for a moment, I forgot about everyone else in the room. But the silence didn't last forever, because what happened next would completely shift the atmosphere of the entire wedding. For a few seconds after Ethan sat down, no one moved. The entire ballroom felt frozen. It was the kind of silence that only happens when something real cuts through a room full of noise. Then, slowly, someone started clapping. It was soft at first. A single pair of hands from somewhere near the back, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire room filled with applause. Not polite applause. Not the kind people give out of obligation. This was different. Stronger, respectful. I looked around and saw people nodding, some even wiping their eyes. Because what Ethan said wasn't just bold. It was true, and everyone knew it. Ethan looked surprised. He hadn't expected that reaction. He leaned slightly closer to me and whispered, "Did I do something wrong?" I shook my head quickly, my voice tight. "No, you did everything right." Across the room, Mark stood completely still. The confident man who had controlled the room just minutes ago was gone. In his place stood someone who didn't know where to look. His smile had disappeared. His posture had changed. For the first time since I met him, he looked uncomfortable, really uncomfortable. Claire stood beside him, her face pale. She tried to smile, tried to recover the moment, but it didn't work, because the energy in the room had shifted completely. Guests who were laughing earlier were now looking at them differently, some with disappointment, some with quiet judgment. The truth had changed everything. The DJ cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, that was," he started. Then he stopped, because there wasn't really anything he could say to fix the moment. Mark stepped forward again, reaching for the microphone. For a brief second, it looked like he might try to joke his way out of it. That's what he always did. But when he looked at the crowd, he hesitated, because no one was smiling anymore. No one was waiting for another joke. They were waiting for something else. Something real. Mark adjusted his tie nervously. "All right," he said, forcing a small laugh. "Didn't expect to get roasted by a 12-year-old tonight." A few people gave weak smiles, but the laughter didn't come back, because the tone was wrong now. The moment had passed, and everyone could feel it. Mark cleared his throat. "Look, I was just joking earlier," he said. His voice didn't have the same confidence. It was all in good fun. But even as he said it, it sounded empty, because now everyone had seen the other side of it. Claire stepped forward quickly, placing a hand on his arm. "Let's just move on," she said. Her voice was light, but there was tension underneath. "Dinner, music, let's enjoy the night." But people didn't move right away. They stayed seated for a moment longer, processing, thinking. Then slowly, conversation started again. Quiet at first, then louder, but the energy was different. More careful, more aware. Mark handed the microphone back to the DJ and stepped away from the center of the room. As he passed our table, he didn't look at me, not even once, which told me everything I needed to know. Claire, however, did look at me, just for a second. Her expression was hard to read. Not angry, not exactly ashamed, but unsettled, like she had just realized something she couldn't ignore. Ethan sat quietly beside me, eating a piece of cake like nothing had happened. But people kept coming over to our table, one by one. A woman I barely knew leaned down and said softly, "Your son is incredible." Another guest nodded. He said what everyone was thinking. Even Daniel's distant relatives, people I had never spoken to before, stopped to give Ethan small smiles of respect. Ethan didn't react much. He just nodded politely each time. Still calm, still quiet, but I could see it in his eyes. He understood. Not just what he said, but what it meant. Later, as the music started and people moved toward the dance floor, Karen, who had been sitting at another table, finally made her way over to me. She leaned down and whispered, "Lily, your son just changed the entire wedding." I looked at Ethan, then back at her. "I think he just told the truth." Karen smiled. "Sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can do." Across the room, Mark was talking to a small group of guests. But he wasn't laughing anymore. He wasn't the center of attention. In fact, people seemed less interested in him now. The spotlight he had created had moved somewhere else, and it wasn't coming back. But the night wasn't over yet. Because later, when the guests started leaving and the celebration began to quiet down, Claire would finally come to me, and what she would say would be something I never expected to hear from her. By the time the music started and people moved to the dance floor, the wedding felt different. Not ruined, but changed. The laughter had come back, the conversations were flowing again, and guests were trying to enjoy the night. But there was something underneath it all now. Awareness. People were more careful with their words, more thoughtful, and every now and then, I would catch someone glancing at Ethan with quiet admiration. Meanwhile, Mark stayed on the other side of the room, still talking, still smiling. But it wasn't the same. The confidence he had earlier was gone. Now it felt forced, like he was trying to rebuild something that had already collapsed. Claire stayed close to him for most of the evening, but she wasn't laughing the way she usually did. She looked distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. Every now and then, I noticed her looking toward our table, toward me, toward Ethan. And each time, she looked away quickly. Ethan, on the other hand, had returned to being exactly who he always was. Quiet, calm. He finished his dessert, sipped his drink, and occasionally watched the dance floor with mild curiosity, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. At one point, I leaned toward him. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. He nodded. "Yeah." "Do you regret what you said?" He thought for a second, then shook his head. "No." I smiled. "Good." He looked at me for a moment. "I just didn't like that they were laughing at you." My chest tightened again. "I know. They shouldn't do that," he added simply. "No," I said gently. "They shouldn't." A little later, one of Claire's friends approached our table. She hesitated before speaking. "I just wanted to say, your son is amazing," she said. "Thank you. And I'm sorry about earlier." I nodded politely. "Thank you for saying that." Because the truth was, it wasn't just Mark who had left. It was a room full of people. And sometimes, it takes one voice to remind everyone where the line is. As the night went on, guests slowly started leaving. One by one, they said their goodbyes. Some hugged me a little tighter than usual. Some gave Ethan a small nod of respect. And eventually, the ballroom began to empty. The music softened. The lights dimmed slightly. The celebration was coming to an end. That's when Claire finally walked toward me. Alone. No Mark. No friends. Just her. For a moment, I wasn't sure what to expect. Anger? Defensiveness? Excuses? But when she reached the table, she didn't say anything right away. She just stood there, looking at me, then at Ethan, then back at me. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I nodded. Ethan looked up at me. "I'll be right here," he said. I squeezed his hand gently. Okay. Claire and I stepped a few feet away from the table, closer to the edge of the room. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she took a small breath. I didn't think it would go that far, she said. Her voice was different, softer, less certain. What didn't? I asked. Mark's joke. I looked at her calmly. It wasn't just a joke, Claire. She nodded slowly. I know. That surprised me, because Claire wasn't someone who admitted things easily. I should have stopped him, she continued. I should have said something. I didn't interrupt. Because for once, she was actually reflecting, instead of defending. She hesitated. I didn't want to make a scene on my wedding day. I tilted my head slightly. So you let him make one with me instead? Claire winced. Yes. There was a long pause between us, the kind of pause that carried years of unspoken things. Then she said something I never expected. I'm sorry, Lily. I blinked, not because I didn't hear her, but because I wasn't used to hearing those words from her. She looked down at her hands. I've always let things slide, she admitted. I thought it wasn't a big deal. She glanced up at me again. But seeing Ethan stand up like that, her voice caught slightly, made me realize how wrong I was. For the first time that night, I saw something real in her expression. Not pride, not defensiveness, just honesty. He was protecting you, she said softly. Yes, I replied, and I should have been doing that too. Another silence. Then Claire asked quietly, Can you forgive me? I looked at her for a long moment, thinking, not about the joke, but about everything that had led up to that moment. Years of small comments, ignored feelings, unspoken boundaries. And then I looked back at Ethan, sitting calmly at the table, waiting, watching, and I realized something important. This wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about change. I can forgive you, I said finally. Claire's shoulders relaxed slightly. But things have to be different, I added. She nodded immediately. They will be. I mean it, Claire. I know. For a moment, we just stood there, not perfectly repaired, but better, more honest than before. Claire gave me a small, genuine smile. Then she turned back toward the exit. I should go, she said. It's been a long day. Yes, I agreed. As she walked away, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not resentment, just closure. But the most important moment of the night wasn't the apology. It wasn't the silence. It wasn't even the speech. It was something much simpler. And it happened just a few minutes later, when Ethan said something to me that I would never forget. After Claire walked away, the room felt quieter than before. Not just because the guests had left, but because something had settled. Something important. I walked back to the table where Ethan was sitting. He looked up at me immediately. Are we going home now? He asked. Soon, I said, smiling gently. I sat down beside him, taking a moment to just breathe. The night had been long, emotional, unexpected, but somehow I didn't feel exhausted. I felt clear. Ethan watched me for a second. Then he asked, Was Aunt Claire mad? I shook my head. No. What did she say? I hesitated briefly.